Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Robert Aaron Morgan, and I am Tom Morgan's younger son. On behalf of my mother, Peggy Aaron Morgan, my brother, Christopher Addison Morgan, and my wife, Christine Faye Morgan, our father's sister, Patsy, and my father's brother, Danny, and all of his Tom's grandchildren, and the extended family members, we would like to say thank you for attending today's memorial service to honor the life of my father, Thomas Addison Morgan, Jr. I would like to also extend at this time a special thank you to the men and the women of the various medical facilities where my father sought treatment over the last few years. Local law enforcement agencies, fire departments, and emergency medical service organizations, and to whom were instrumental in answering various emergency calls. And to those that rendered aid when he was most in need. Your compassion and your level of caring towards my father was exemplary. And you truly are unsung heroes. The careers you have chosen as a profession are physically, mentally, and emotionally challenging. My father, being the son of a physician, knew these career struggles, trials, and tribulations all too well. I feel it is of the highest order of importance to acknowledge your efforts that were put forward and to tell you that he was always extremely grateful for your efforts and that you had given, regardless of his body's demise here on earth. In this physical sense of being, you should not have the slightest inkling of remorse. Rather, he would have demanded that you raise your heads high and be proud of your efforts and the fights that you made on his behalf. Your long nights of unrelenting labor, compassion, and care for a complete stranger brought him more time here on earth with his family and his loved ones and friends. For those efforts, you should be celebrated with the highest levels of recognition, and he, myself, and my family are forever grateful. Finally, our family has been overwhelmed with the outpouring of support from the local community. We have sincerely appreciated those individuals that have taken time out of their busy lives to visit, phone, text, email words of encouragement, and to offer their condolences on the passing of my father. These gestures of kindness and thoughtfulness have served to offer a true testament of how influential of a man he really was, and how much of an impact he had on us all. Thomas Addison Morgan Jr. was 80. He passed away on August 25th, 2023 in Southampton Memorial Hospital. He was born in Richmond, Virginia. Thomason was a lifelong resident of Franklin, and he was the son of the late Dr. Thomas Addison Morgan, Sr., MD, and Margaret Ellis Morgan, also of Franklin. Tom was a graduate of Franklin High School in the class of 1962 and Frederick College. He continued his studies at the University of Miami, focusing his studies on religion and science. He served 6 years in the Virginia National Guard and was a former employee of Eggleston, Tidewar Occupational Center, Western Tidewar Community Services Board, and Schul's Furniture Company. He was a lifelong member of this church, Franklin Baptist Church, and was widely known for his insightful, no-holds-barred, critical thinking style, which continuously kept his good friend and debate partner, Dr. Charles Walls, on his toes. He was widely known for his caring demeanor and his genuine compassion for all of those he encountered. All his years, he was known for his chiseled physique and muscularity, once being described with the terrifying similarity of an angry, charging silverback gorilla after the destruction of his beloved and meticulously carved pumpkin. That pumpkin meeting its ultimately and untimely demise with the use of a cherry bomb firework by friends of his younger sister and brother as a note Some of those conspirators of this incident are in this sanctuary today, but shall remain nameless. Most importantly, he was an amazing husband, an inspirational father, the proudest of grandfathers, and a genuine friend to us all. Left to cherish his memory are his wife of 53 years, whom was the absolute love of his life, Peggy Harum Morgan. Their two sons, Christopher A. Morgan of Virginia Beach, Virginia, and Robert Aaron Morgan, and Christine, my wife of Franklin, a sister, Margaret Pat Johnson, and Bill of Williamsburg, and a brother, Daniel Danny Morgan of Palmetto, Florida, and 10 grandchildren, Gabby, Lucius, Tristan, Julian, Carlin, James, Zeke, Henry, Charlotte, and Esther, and a large extended family. Thomas Addison Morgan was so much more than many things to so many people. He was supportive. He was kind. He was understanding. He was restrained. He was reserved. He was humble. And he was consoling. He was a person that was defiant of social divisions, especially in an era when society's norms frowned upon such friendships and associations. Tom was a friend to all. He spoke to everyone. He refused to hold grudges and was always the first person to extend an olive branch after a disagreement. Finally, he was curious about everything and always pursued further and greater understandings in history, politics, religion, science, and philosophy. Dad loved life, and he loved sharing that feeling with others. He knew that the true definition of humanity was not in great spectacles for all to see, but instead simple random acts of kindness performed subtly day in and day out. That is the man that we all knew and loved, and the reason we have all gathered here today. For me, however, Thomas Addison Morgan Jr. was something far more significant. He held a role that was pivotal in shaping me as a person, and ultimately, his words throughout my life guided and shaped me towards the person I would become today. He was my hero. He was my role model. And he was the person who always could lift my spirits, even in the lowest and darkest of times. He had a way with words that always rationalized the inexplainable and cast new light and new meanings on old themes that others viewed as mundane. He was an ideological alchemist that masterfully blended philosophical thought, various religious teachings, and physical and metaphysical scientific theory into his own ultimate interpretation of the world, which surrounds us and defines us as human beings. He was Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim, and atheist wrapped into one. On a side note, nothing catapulted my mother and Christine and Chris from the dinner table faster on Sunday afternoons than when the age-old topic of Catholicism and Protestantism arose between us. You see, I was raised Protestant, Baptist more specifically, and converted to Catholicism later in life. Dad was the product of a Baptist father, a Methodist mother, and an Episcopalian lineage. To summarize it, and the best analogy I could give today was that my father's belief was like a cocktail drink at a bar. The base was Protestant, the chaser was Baptist, which was then spiked with Catholicism, Jewish, Islam, Buddhist belief, finally topped off with a little umbrella which read scientific theory and reason. He and I cleared my mother's dining room in approximately 2 seconds with the initiation of the debate, and go for hours, at some points landing us at such impasses that without the intervention of Mom and Christine, things would have surely resulted in the sole drummer beating out and opposing steps, immediately followed by a gentleman's pistol duel in the backyard. He loved reading, researching, and making notes. He was extremely diverse in his readings and held a level of comprehension that was second to none. His favorite being the philosophical and historical writings of Mark Twain, Martin Luther, Thomas Aquinas, Stephen Hawkins, Richard Dawkins, Charles Darwin, and Carl Sagan. Quite the mix. He was the strongest man alive, and he projected that strength into everyone that was in his presence. He emboldened them with a sense of invulnerability and power, a feeling of encouragement and unwavering feeling that no matter what your quest outcome may be, always there cheering you on, and the proudest person of your efforts in the room was him. His encouragement never fled, and regardless of the attempt being the first or the 50th, he never gave up on you or showed any signs of losing hope that this attempt would be and not be your triumph. And for particularly, most absolutely, he was my oldest and my best friend, my confidant, and most importantly, my one and only dad and my pop. Last week, Dad's legacy, however, achieved new heights. It became something even more miraculous and powerful in my view. Something that I can only rationalize as truly divine in nature and origin. And once again, another example of God's methods, which are always working within our lives. Methods and processes that are perfectly engineered, sequenced, and staged. Gifts for our benefit and growth, regardless of our initial interpretations and faults. August 25th, 2023 will be recorded in the annals of my life as one of the most difficult, exhausting, challenging, and yet miraculous series of events that I shall ever experience. After 2 very hard weeks with sustained hospital care for my father and long periods of sleep deprivation, which was followed by the final destination of the ICU ward, I wrapped up a 4-hour visit with my dad by saying, "I love you, Pop. I will see you in the morning." To which he responded, "I love you too, son. See you later." I kissed his head. I left the room, stopping for a moment to turn and look back before closing the curtain. At which time I observed him drifting off to sleep, and now resting easily, calmly, and peacefully. I remember a sincere feeling coming over me as I walked across the parking lot that night. The feeling that I had a revitalized feeling of hope. Hope that my father was going to make another recovery, and a new building feeling that he was going to make it back home yet again. My optimism fueled by my entrance into the room earlier that night, and being shocked with absolute amazement in the discovery of him awake, alert, greeting me with the all-familiar, "Hey, bud," that I had been accustomed to hearing for nearly every day of the last 40 years of my life. Energized further by the lucid and clear conversation we had had during our time together, and invigorated even further with the silent observation of how rested he looked and the renewing of his color. It was a feeling of somehow, yet again, he had managed to escape time's demand, and that he had somehow managed to win another battle and gain the opportunity to have another fight on another day. You see, now I must confess that until that meeting, I had projected an optimistic picture for all to see and used it to fuel strength in those around me. But silently, I held a much bleaker prediction on Pop's outcome. The prediction that Pop would not survive his current predicament and that my hope had been lost. But like all things in this world, there is but one certainty, and that certainty is that time never stops. Not even for a moment, not This was a theme that Dad and I discussed on numerous occasions, especially on our one-on-one or mini excursions, in which we commonly referred to as our man talks. This vital realization had come like the percussion of an explosion, which had sent impulse and sound waves straight through my body, striking me while I was laying somberly asleep in bed later that evening, in the unfamiliar state where I was finally enjoying a firm bliss, a peaceful bliss and relaxation, finally free from the toils of anxiety and anguish about the next day, what the next day may bring. I was yet again optimistically filled with the celebration that he had triumphed again against the odds. He had won the day, and my ride with him was not yet over. But there was no explosion this time, which preceded the aforementioned shockwave in delivering the source of such deafening sound. Instead, just the scared and terrified voice of my wife echoing through the walls of our house, ringing with unforgettable words which pierced the walls of my deepest sleep, the veils of my deepest sleep. The words, Aaron, Aaron, wake up. The hospital just called and your father has died. This exact moment in my life was instantly scorched into my brain, printed in ultra-high definition, never to be forgotten, not one iota and not 1 second. Instantly, that truth and that magnitude of its declaration, that time will never wait, never stall, and never stop. Whether we want it to or not, it always moves forward, and it always brings constant and perpetual change with it. That truth being sealed in iron cladding, the phone call to my mother, and the first time I embraced her in the kitchen at her home, and after receiving such terrible news. In the hours following the loss of my father, I felt broken, destroyed, and angry. I was filled with confusion and questions, and yes, self-doubt and guilt. Like my father, I had always been a person that sought out the hows and the whys when observing events in this world. But this time, I had no clear answers. I had no rationalization, and I had no logical explanation. Why did he look so good and gain such clarity only to be lost a few short hours later? Why did he leave? Why did I leave him when I had planned to stay all night? And yes, how could I let him die alone? These were questions, and along with many more that had just torn me open and broken every notion about my view and certainty of the world. I just could not fathom the logic for the reasons of why he had been taken from me. The logic of why we are presented into a world with suffering, the experience of sensation of pain, and the inevitable reality that we will lose those that we love as time marches on. Finally, the overwhelming and terrifying question, what will I do now that my father's gone? But, as with all things, my faith in God and His works have always held truth in one simple saying. It's an Islamic phrase in origin that has always rang in my mind during such hours of desperation and despair. It translates from Aramaic to English as all is as God wills it. It's a phrase that I have always interpreted as God constantly seeks to grow and strengthen us, to give us charity and understanding, and to our existence questions being laid before us, what we, as Catholics, call mysteries. They are situations and obstacles which we must walk through personally and on our own for the gaining of experience and appreciation. Appreciation that can only be gained by experience and not through being told. Traveling over the challenging path which God lays before our feet shows us and instructs us without question or self-doubt what the best answer is. These paths and their obstacles are never without meaning or by chance, but rather they are well-planned, highly engineered pathways which follow like train tracks. Throughout our lives, they lead us to the same point, the jump-off point, for what Pop used to call life's next metamorphosis. Only then, with all of this gained experience, do we truly know and understand what it means to be human. Only then does the splendor of the next life have the full joy and appreciation it is worthy of in our hearts. For me, these questions I have alluded to earlier were answered very quickly on the morning of my father's death. I am convinced they were nothing short of divine interventional messages from God, especially as I started to wander from the flock. It all changed with the joining of two statements from two separate individuals that had never met or been in the same room together. And until this day, actually. The first was from a family member, Tim Davenport. Tim came to me that morning to offer his support in the ICU waiting room. And upon hearing that I had been with Dad the night before for several hours and learning that I had feelings of guilt for leaving, he told me that something that my father and I had discussed on numerous occasions. That being that he was convinced Pop did not want us to experience the pain of seeing him transition to the next life. He said that in nature and tribal cultures, animals and people know when their time is near and purposely isolate themselves from the group. They go on off and find a quiet place where it is peaceful and serene. And they lay down and they go to sleep. And they close their eyes in this world, opening their eyes in the next, before the throne of God, the Father Almighty, and His Mother, the Blessed Queen. Pop and I have discussed this phenomenon on many occasions. The second came from my dear friend and my priest, Father Nichols. Father Nichols, on the same morning, told me that often those individuals that are close to the end of their time gain sudden bursts of energy. They say what they need to say, to whom they need to say it, and then they let go. They fulfill their final mission. The night before his death, Dad had his bursts of energy. He had had the opportunity to tell me more about his parents. We were able to say we loved each other, one another, and we were able to say, "See you later," a statement derived from a common saying of his during our talks. Derived from the full saying, he taught me that death is never a permanent goodbye, but rather just a see you later or in a short while. Something I have already passed on to my children. With the joining of these two statements, an atom split within my brain, and the power of the resulting chain reaction has continued to release shockwaves through all of my memories of my time with Pop, and the pure power and depth of God's intention within our lives. A new light was sent out, and immediately I knew that Dad had been preparing me all this time for this exact question, and grooming me to receive the answer in now being here today, doing this eulogy in his honor. He is evaluating my level of understanding and comprehension to the final lesson he wanted me to have. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact date and time my final lesson began. December 17, 2018 was the exact date. And that time, and the time that he started, that night, our relationship evolved into its highest level of understanding for each other that we could possibly achieve. We had gone to a special release production of They Shall Not Grow Old. It's a film by Peter Jackson, the director of the Lord of the Rings movie. The movie was a restoration project and HD coloration of film from World War I, compiled with audio testimony from veterans that had been overlaid. On the way home, for the first time in my life my dad talked to me about his father and their relationship, about who his father was and the struggles he witnessed that his father endured, being a physician and surrounded by pain, suffering, and death daily. Until that moment, I had never heard anything but generalities about my granddad. He told me that it was not until the year and a half before my grandfather's life ended that he had actually got to know who his father really was, the depth of his character, and began to appreciate the magnitude of the responsibility that he carried. During this conversation, he enlightened me with a saying that had been passed down through multiple generations from father to son, father to son, father to son within our family. Dr. Morgan said to my father, "Your great-grandfather passed this to my grandfather. My grandfather passed this down to my father, and now I'm going to pass it down to you. Son, there are two things in this world that separate us as humans from all other primates in the natural world. Those being knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge being the things you learn from study and others, and wisdom being things that you learn from trials and tribulation of personal experience. The latter cannot be taught or acquired by any other means. You must live through it to gain it. That being said, regardless of how old you grow and how much knowledge you acquire, I, as your father, will always be wiser than you, because I have lived longer than you and I have experienced more that this world has to offer than you. Nothing I tell you will ever carry the same level of impact as that which this world serves you through experience. Now that he's gone, his words, actions, deeds echoed throughout my brain, and all of them contained such profound magnitude and meaning. Looking back now, I know that Dad knew his time was near. He was explaining to me the answers to questions I had had. Why must we suffer? Experience pain, sadness, and despair. He knew that I had not yet taken the final step on my path and conquered the last obstacle which lay before me. I had not yet to gain his wisdom, the necessary wisdom, to have the appreciation of such revelation. Dad knew the answer, but he also had known that the simple conveying of such knowledge alone was inadequate from my true understanding. He had gained the wisdom through the loss of his father, the experience of feelings of loss and pain, which he had gained. He understood that such pains and questions are allowed to exist and remain unanswered because only then, through personal experience, do we truly understand and appreciate the magnitude, the beauty, and the splendor of a person's soul. The simply incredibly act and such amazing work of God's design in the performance of creation of an individual like my father, Thomas Madison Morgan, Jr. I have one passage that I'd like to read from my mother and from my brother. It's from 2 Corinthians, verse 3 through 7. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforted us in all tribulations, that we may also be able to comfort them who are in all distress, by the exhortations wherewith we also are exhorted by God. For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so also by Christ doeth our comfort abound. Now whether we be in tribulation, it is for your exoneration and salvation, or whether we be comforted, it is for your consolation, or whether we be exhorted, it is for your exoneration and salvation which worketh the enduring of the same sufferings which we also suffer, that our hope for you may be steadfast, knowing that as you are partakers of the suffering, so shall you be also in the consolation. Dad once gave me a message for you. But he had asked me to tell you this when I felt the time was appropriate. And I believe that this moment is appropriate. He said that in life, we are not allowed to choose our families. We have no control to whom our parents are or who we're going to be. But you, son, were profoundly unique. You were the exception to this saying because Dad chose you. He first laid eyes on you, and he knew that this was God's plan. And you were his son, and that God had afforded him an exception to the rule. Mom, Dad loved you and still does. I think it is incredibly amazing that you both said the same things to me in private, completely aware of what the other was saying. You are and forever will be the love of his life. He has always known that he was blessed to have you, and he truly worshiped the ground you walked on. He is with you now and forever. For all of you, he is not gone. He waits for us with his father and his mother and all of those that have come before us. He will be in our company again. Remember his words. Life is one metamorphosis after another. And this parting of ours is not a goodbye, but simply a see you later. I love you, Pop. Thank you, and until we meet again. And I'd like to read Psalm 23. The Lord ruleth me, and I shall want nothing. He hath set me in a place of pasture. He hath brought me up on the water of refreshment. He hath converted my soul. He hath led me on the paths of justice for his own name's sake. For though I should walk in the midst of the shadow of death, I will fear no evils, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, thy comfort I aim. Thou hast prepared a table before me, and against them that afflicted me. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, and my chalice inebrieth me. How goodly is it, and the mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and that I may dwell in the house of the Lord until length of days.